I'm Rebecca Riley. I'm Head of Research at the Combined Authority and Business Development Director at WMREDI. And we're bringing together a partnership of people that have helped develop the state of the region. And the agenda today, Professor Richard Black's going to introduce us and welcome everybody to today's event, followed by Jonathan Skinner, who's standing in today for Julia Goldsworthy, as she's off sick today. So thank you to Jonathan for standing in at the last minute, but Jonathan will be giving us an introduction to what the purpose of the State of the Region report is and how it will inform decision making going forward. I'll follow that with an overview of the State of the Region that we've published in the last few days. And I'll be looking back at the challenges over the last 12 months and the effects that they are having. And then Alex is going to pick up around the evidence base around the Skills Advisory Panel report, which is part of the collective of evidence that we've used within the State of the Region. Professor Anne Green is going to then do an overview of some of the work that we've been doing in the region, which is a follow-on from last year's State of the Region report, which had a chapter in there about potential trends. We've done a whole series of research and work looking at those trends and how it might affect the region, and she'll be reporting on where we've got to with that work. Delma from the Black Country Consortium is then going to do an overview of the data lab, which we're also launching today, which will include and present a lot of the data that we've got within the State of the Region. And then finally, Simon's going to chair a panel discussion with Henrietta Brucella, Paula Diaz and Roger Mendonca around the challenges that we face within the region and what partners within the region might look to do to address some of those challenges over the next 12 months. So if I can hand over to Richard now to welcome you all.
So thank you, Beck, and thank you to all of you for coming to this launch of the fifth, I think it is, report of the State of the Region, the third to have been produced by WMREDI and City-REDI, and second already under pandemic conditions. So this report is a partnership report. It's been funded by the West Midlands Combined Authority and with special thanks to the Black Country Consortium in this case, and particularly Delma Dwight, who's contributed significantly to this report. It's a stock take of the last 12 months for the region against a backdrop of rapidly changing conditions and policy. And of course, we should point out as well that it's using data that is almost inevitably somewhat lagged. But it builds on the weekly monitoring that WMREDI and its partners have been carrying out over the last couple of years to inform the region. Monitoring work during the pandemic that's been highlighted by the LSE's What Works Centre for Local Economic Growth as particularly good practice. Now, as Beck has outlined, we have quite a packed agenda for the launch, so I don't want to take up too much time, but just a little bit of background on WMREDI, which is led by City-REDI at the University of Birmingham. That's in my college, the College of Social Sciences here at the university, but also in partnership with the Combined Authority and other regional bodies. And WMREDI is really designed as a catalyst for a step change in regional collaboration around data, evidence and evaluation. The work of the partnership brings together universities, policymakers to establish a robust approach to decision-making in regional and local policy, and to better utilise the wealth of academic knowledge in the region. We've had funding from UKRI's Research England and match funds from the University of Birmingham and indeed from other leading regional stakeholders. Key partners include LEPS, the Black Country Consortium, as I mentioned, 5 universities, Aston, Birmingham City, Coventry and Wolverhampton, as well as the University of Birmingham, all 7 local authorities in the Combined Authority area and the Midlands Engine. So quite a mammoth undertaking in collaboration, and hopefully those of you on this call are representing all of those different stakeholders. Just one last thing, I've been asked for those of you who use Twitter to mention our hashtag, that is hashtag SOTR21. If you'd like to tweet about this event, please go ahead and do that. If you use the hashtag, we'll be able to pull all of that together afterwards. So with no further ado, I am going to hand over, I think, to Jonathan for the next part of the event.
Many thanks, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. Really, my comments about the kind of purpose of the State of the Region report and how it's used, I think, follow on very much from Richard's kind of introduction about the strength of partnership. I really wanted to kind of break down my comments really into three main kind of buckets. There's a sense of kind of why we come together, why we have the kind of State of the Region. The how it is done, I think, is really important too. And then I'll finish off on some of the kind of uses, and then I think that really gives a platform for some of the insights that we'll hear later, both from Alex on the kind of skills advisory panel work, and also across the panelists later on, in terms of kind of them bringing some colour behind the actual responses and kind of policy levers from that work. But to begin with, I think that it's important that much of the value of the strength of the region report lies in the strength of the partnership. The reason that constituent authorities kind of came together 5 years ago now, five's a very important year, as well as this being the kind of fifth iteration of State of the Region. You know, the Combined Authority has just marked its fifth birthday, and that was really built on the basis that the knowledge, insight and accountability of local leaders to make decisions about policies and programmes is better rooted in kind of the experience and the kind of knowledge of those local areas than in kind of London or other agencies, other national agencies. And so given that kind of basis, I think that there's a really important role for evidence for a couple of reasons. The first is to ensure that that mix of kind of partners have a shared kind of single version of the truth, a shared understanding of what that evidence base is, and also kind of its interpretation of what it's telling us. It's also about then being able to use that evidence base to understand what's the positive changes that we're seeking to see. And I think thirdly, it's about how we're able to kind of track that change over time, and to understand not just, you know, Richard has kind of referenced lots of the kind of lagging indicator and analysis that we have, but also about bringing together some of that kind of lagging interpretation with a view about what might happen in the future. And I was kind of particularly pleased to see some of the work that Anne will be talking to us later about on the Megatrends work. So I think overall that's a kind of reason why the mix of the types of different evidence that are in the State of the Region report are really important for kind of regional policy making. So if that's the kind of why, then I think just focusing on some of the how is pretty significant too. And I think that it's great that the region has the capacity and the rigour of WMREDI to be able to, one, kind of undertake analysis of this depth, and crucially to kind of knit it all together, because I think that the kind of interconnections between some of the evidence is really important to see in the round. And you know, it's so important that kind of it's written in law almost. So there is a particular kind of requirement that the Combined Authority has to maintain an economic assessment of the area, and that also in our local industrial strategy there is a kind of commitment there that we will maintain that overview of kind of locally agreed indicators. So this is kind of felt to be something that's absolutely vital for policy making. And as I said, by being able to do that in a way that is partnership based, using all of the kind of institutions that Richard alluded to before, and also with that kind of independence and rigour that comes from having kind of WMREDI and City-REDI at the heart of that, I think is absolutely vital. And then so just finally, I'll kind of then mention some of the uses of this activity. So I guess there's a kind of a macro big picture response to this. and then some of the more specific elements that we'll hear about a little later on. In terms of the overall messages that we're kind of learning from the State of the Region report, I think it's important that our kind of political and business leaders are able to consider those in the round and then set out what they see as the priorities and are able to address. And so some of the kind of early insight from this State of the Region report was considered by the CA's board in March, which led to the region agreeing 5 key challenges that would be the basis of kind of the outcomes that they want to see in future. And those I know are kind of drawn out heavily then in the State of the Region report around delivering good jobs, supporting thriving places and communities, embedding our green ambitions, tackling inequality and levelling up, and preventing a lost generation. And so that really gives the kind of overarching policy umbrella that how the region responds to this report. But also there will be the much more kind of precise areas, and we'll explore some of them later in this webinar, to be able to understand exactly what those interventions are based on analysis of what works, but also what doesn't work too. So in essence, I think all of the work of the Combined Authority and its partners is kind of what forms the response to this State of the Region report. But that it is just vital, I think, for us to kind of acknowledge and emphasise just how important it is to be able to kind of synthesise this information in one place at one moment. And yeah, so enormous thanks for WMREDI in kind of holding the ring in doing that. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm the first one to share slides, so let's see how this goes. Just to answer a couple of questions that we've had through, all of the content from today, and we are recording the session so we can make it available on our website, whether that's the Combined Authority site linked through to the various partners that have contributed work to this. Alongside this year's State of the Region, we will have links to previous ones, and we'll also have a link to the supporting document where it's been published so far, and we'll circulate all of that after the event. So as has already been mentioned, this is the 5th version of this. It is the second one within the pandemic and post-Brexit environment that we've had, and I think the thing to bear in mind with all of this, the data that is within the State of the Region has to meet some criteria, and that includes there has to be annual releases. Where possible, we can get data at both the core WMCA 7 MET area and also the 3LEP bigger geography, and that there is a comparative national benchmark which allows us to understand performance. One of the things this year that myself and Dalma have dealt with really is that a lot of data that's come out has either been severely delayed or cut altogether. So things like data on passengers, visitors, etc. has suffered as a result of changing policy. And the flip side of that is that there has been other newer data which we feed into our weekly monitors, which helps us to understand how things are unfolding as we go. But it does mean a bit of a trade-off with what's available at the regional level for the State of the Region. One of the big issues actually that we've had this year is, sadly, due to the timing, a lot of the data was released sort of the end of May, June, because everything was delayed, which has meant that we've had to do quite a rapid update of this State of the Region since, as Jonathan said, it went to the board earlier. However, the basic messages have remained the same. So just to highlight and recap on that partnership that Richard mentioned, we now have a collaboration agreement in place with all the partners of the WMREDI partnership. That includes all 7 of the local authorities in the CA area, 5 universities, the growth company, the Combined Authority, the 3 LEPs, the Midlands Engine. And the idea is that we can develop and collaborate on projects, and you've got some examples today in terms of how that's already working. It's unique in the country. It's the first time that organisations have come together in this way, and the focus of the work is around developing our approach to data and creating the data lab, creating collaborative research, and you've got a couple of examples today. The monitoring, which the State of the Region is part of, and also a big chunk of this is around the evaluation and how we develop better business cases and evaluate the impact of interventions on the back of the evidence and the research that we develop. So overall, how's the region performed? I think the thing to note on this is I think we all have a pretty good idea of how things have panned out in the last 12 months. There's sort of everywhere has suffered, not just in the UK or regionally, but globally. And the important thing within this, what I'm going to draw out in these next few slides, and also within the State of the Region, is how the Combined Authority area has been disproportionately affected, or issues that are bigger here than in other places. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So if I don't pick up on everything, it's partly because it's following the pattern of other places. So as the slide says, there's no precedent. Things have been changing quite rapidly. And as mentioned before, data is lagging. And actually, we've also had to cope more so this year than we've ever seen before, which is where policy actions have directly affected the indicators. So things like employment hasn't been hit as hard as might have been expected, as we saw in 2008. Businesses have remained fairly static, but that's partly because the implications of not being able to close down a business and so on. Innovation, there's been very little in terms of data that's come out that has monitored innovation change over the last 12 months, but we know from the tacit knowledge that we've been gathering that businesses are having to redesign their business plans and how they do business quite rapidly. And we've also had issues around FDI and visitors where lack of travel has really cut those down. In terms of the run-up to this, as we said last year in the State of the Region, the Combined Authority was outperforming other areas, but as data has been released, we've seen that the impacts of Brexit and pandemic has hit that performance. And we've actually been hit harder than other regions because of the industrial makeup and the structural issues that the region had before. I suppose the headline forecast really, because we've now got Oxford Economic Model, which we can share with partners and help underpin work with partners, because we've commissioned our own model for the Combined Authority area down to local authority level. But effectively, that forecast is saying that we won't return back to the levels of GVA until 2022, and employment until 2023. So the impact of what we've had in the last 12 months is going to be for a number of years to come. However, because we're doing the weekly monitoring, which has helped us understand this, we can see that there are, as things are opening back up, there are signs of positive rebound, especially with things like the Purchasing Managers Index doing well and business sentiment being positive. In terms of key impacts overall, by May last year, the number of furloughed jobs were equivalent to all the jobs in Birmingham, and that's quite a stark figure. And it's come down incrementally over the period until now, but we're still looking at the same levels of the entirety of the jobs in Coventry being furloughed across the whole of the Combined Authority area. And that obviously is a large number of people who may not have been working for some time, and that are also on reduced incomes, which has a negative effect across the whole economy. The sectors previously seeing growth are actually have been the hardest hit. So retail, hospitality and tourism have been particularly hit by lockdowns, and manufacturing and logistics have also had the impact of sort of the Brexit and the supply chain disruption that we saw at the beginning of the year. So where we would normally get our growth from is seeing some significant issues. What we can say though with the retail, hospitality and tourism is that we're seeing in the numbers that the places that are reliant on them are beginning to rebound a bit with as we're going into the holiday season and opening up. The other issue I think for the 3 city centres though is that we're still going through significant change and disruption. And we'll pick up on this work later on in the agenda, but we're unlikely to see a return to the offices 5 days a week, which has some significant effects that we'll still have to deal with. And we've also had high health and well-being impacts, including levels of infection, isolation, deaths and ongoing health problems that have exacerbated the fact that we already had disparities in our health. As Jonathan said, we focused the State of the Region around the 5 challenges that were coming out of the emerging evidence in the run-up to March. In this year's State of the Region report, what we've done is we prioritised some outcome indicators that we think will be important to monitor over the next 12 months and to reflect on next year. And we've also given an idea about what potential output indicators people may want to look at when they're looking at how do we address these challenges. So in terms of just an overview really of those challenges, the first one is around delivering good jobs. And what we know is that jobs were increasing, but they were slower than in England. And we had 1.9 million people employed. And again, that was increasing, but slower than England. And unemployment rate was higher in the West Midlands at 5.9% compared to the UK of 4.6%. However, a lot of in terms of the employment, COVID impacts are yet to be seen as all of the support packages have not ended. So we can still expect some of the withdrawal and the easing of those supports to have some impacts. And what we don't really know is how much those support packages have done their job and kept people working and in employment over this period. Overall, the region did lose a significant amount of jobs in the region, but that's ebbing and flowing as we 100,000 jobs that we lost, and we are seeing some return to that. As I said before, we've still got 195,000 workers on furlough. So they're in jobs, but they're not working, and that's causing some issues within the supply chain, etc. In terms of businesses, we've held up quite well. We've always been a region that did well on business starts, and we're still up at 67 per 10,000 populations, which is very good relative to the other regions and the UK. However, we've still got the same issue of some interventions being there, and we don't really know what the outcome will be as they start to get withdrawn. But as the same issue in terms of survival lingers with us, so we're very good at startup and less good at maintaining survival. And in terms of insolvency, the ratio of insolvency has grown, so we're losing more businesses. But what we don't know again is whether that is being underpinned and shored up by the interventions that government has put in place. In terms of supporting thriving places and communities, again, part of this is also looking at the affordability of houses and within places. And one of the things that we've seen is we've seen house growth higher than we have for many years, and affordable housing the numbers we targeted has gone up, but actually alongside that, house prices have continued to increase. So the one thing is trading off against the other at the moment, which means that house prices are outstripping wages, they're outstripping the ability to afford homes, both in rent terms and in buying terms. And what we've seen in the last 12 months, as we noted before, in terms of furlough and jobs, etc., that wages have been affected and slowed, and that people may have lost overtime and income, which is also affecting the affordability thing. So we've got a storm of partners in the region really doing a great job in terms of building houses and building them at what what is hopefully affordability, but that cost is outstripping that. I think alongside that, in terms of thriving places, we've got the issue of visitors numbers. We did very well in this previously, but obviously with the lack of business tourism and the lack of holiday visitors, this is sort of stagnated over the last 12 months really. And I think in particular in this region, one of the issues that we might have going into the future is business tourism, and how much that props up our general economy and is a thriving area in the past. In terms of embedding green ambitions, actually the sectors in this area have done really well in the region, and a lot of the investment that has gone around this has helped boost manufacturing and industries that might have struggled otherwise. One thing to bear in mind with this is that the region is a net importer of energy, because we don't have the natural resources that other regions have. So really low carbon and energy efficiency is vital to this region to bring our costs down. The other thing to bear in mind in this is actually, even though we've been going through a pandemic, energy prices in the last 12 months have increased by 37% nationally, and that's no different in our region. And this is pushing more and more people into fuel poverty. So the efficiency of homes and how we generate and get our energy is vital over the next few years, not just for green ambitions, but actually for to help the poorest in our communities. And on that as well, in terms of tackling inequality and levelling up, again, we've seen, as everywhere, as the pandemic has exacerbated any inequality that we have. So actually, in terms of our sort of the impacts that we've faced, the healthy life inequality gap for males has increased up to 8.7 years. So people are ill for longer within the region, and it's 7.1 for females. And actually that healthy life level is there's also internal disparities, where in Walsall it's 57.9 years and 66.6 years in Solihull. So the health of our region is a real problem, and the state of health report goes into this much more depth. But it is something to bear in mind when we're looking at our inequalities, especially seeing as the pandemic has exacerbated this. In terms of preventing a lost generation, and this has been a big theme, I think, in the last 12 months, and also in the monitors, as we've seen that it's picking up on the last issue as well around inequalities. It's young people that have been affected disproportionately. Because of the jobs that they were in, they were more likely to be closed, because the impact on the education, and we've seen this pan out in the indicators. However, qualification levels this year have grown considerably, and we've done a lot better this year than other years. The thing to bear in mind with that is that they are looking at the data just to make sure that the effect of the way that they sample hasn't had an effect on the way people report. However, although we're doing really well, we're still behind in terms of level 4s. To reach the national average, we'd have to have another 165,000 people educated at level 4. And the problem with the economy is, if the more educated, the more skilled your population is, the better it rebounds and recovers. So we need to really concentrate on educating and upskilling for the future within the region. And then final slide, which is just a bit of a summary on this. The region, like everywhere else, faces challenges. I've highlighted some of the things that are in the report, but obviously the report is a lot more detailed, and there are other supporting documents that you can look through. We'll continue to monitor the policy impacts, as I've highlighted. Some of them are still yet to hit within the economic monitor. There are significant challenges ahead within policy, such as the end of furlough and the business support protections that are in place. and also challenges around low wages and the effect on claimants and youth unemployment that might have. I think, however, we do have some real opportunities in terms of going forward. And I do sometimes, the last 12 months, I have felt a bit like the harbinger of doom. But there has been a lot of opportunity and growth, especially around the take-up of technology, which has accelerated, and the changing business sort of models that have resulted. And there's strong business and financial service sector, which will continue to create opportunities and is still growing. And there's also that potential to bounce back, as we've seen incredible amount of savings built up and paying off of debt, which actually means going forward people are in a more secure situation, bearing in mind those inequality issues. And we of course have the boost of the Commonwealth Games, and it's useful to reflect today as we're in the middle of the Olympic Games, the effect and the boost that something like the Games can give. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour for people. And if I can stop sharing, and I can hand over to Alex.
Excellent. Hello, good afternoon. Just before I get started, I'll ask your forbearance for the fact that I'm working up the cafe at the moment due to some home internet problems. So you might hear a little bit of background ambience. Hopefully that won't be too bad. And I will just take a moment now to share my screen and to bring up our presentation. Okay, so I'm going to be talking today in this segment just about the analysis of the regional education and skills system that we've been doing over the last year, and in particular the local skills report. So I'm just going to talk first about the background behind that, why we've done this analysis and the context for it. And I'm then going to highlight a few key policy challenges that have emerged from this piece of work, and then have a look at the supply and demand for skills in the region before setting out a few questions to reflect on, perhaps about some of the challenges that we've experienced during the COVID period, and also some of the prior trends going into it as well. So, and just to set out the background context here, the local skills report was developed by the West Midlands Combined Authority and partners, and this is a process that all of the local enterprise partnerships and the combined authorities have gone through on behalf of the Department for Education, and each of them have been conducting an analysis over the last year of their own regional education and skills system, with the intent of providing to the Department for Education a clear analysis of what the local issues are and what the local supply and demand shortfalls are in the skills that we're producing relative to what's needed by the market, what's needed by our citizens. And so that's the broad purpose of the report. It's intended to be something that people can refer to and to get a quick analysis of particular areas of the skills system. And this work was put together over the last year, as I mentioned, and published recently back in April. And of course, the data changes all the time, and we anticipate updating this work in the future and in the next few months. And the report initially sets out a data dashboard looking at key trends across all different levels and in terms of age of education, different aspects of demand, what employers perceive as being skills that we have in short supply, and then also some background information about demographics and the regional economy and how that pertains to skills. So that's the main intent of the report and the kind of areas that we'll be covering. And so just to start with, I'm going to highlight a few of the policy challenges that emerged from the work to develop this report. Most of these will be fairly obvious challenges. So we've seen a very sharp increase in the claimant count all across the region, but also in ways and in areas that are slightly different to the employment challenges that we normally experience. So for instance, several areas that are normally accustomed to quite low levels of unemployment have proportionally seen quite big increases in unemployment, and also quite predictably, unfortunately, we've seen larger increases in unemployment amongst the youngest part of the population. People have recently left university in that sort of age group. So that very sharp increase obviously means more pressure on local services and connecting people to jobs and employment, and a different demographic of people who need support. I'd also note, secondly, the rapid population growth in the region, and as is well known, the West Midlands is a very young region relative to the UK as a whole. That brings with it some advantages, and we're comparatively insulated from some of the demographic problems that the country faces as a whole, but also challenges that we have a very large number of young people to accommodate in the jobs market, and also producing a large number of graduates, which makes issues like graduate retention very important. And also going back to employment, here, as well as young people being disproportionately affected by increases in unemployment, women and Black and minority ethnic people have faced particular challenges from COVID, both from the employment implications, the unemployment implications, I should say, and also from being more likely to work in the kind of jobs where your health is more exposed as well. So we've seen that disproportionality come in, and as Rebecca said earlier, that existing inequities have been reinforced over the last 18 months. And also the other persistent issue that I should raise that predates COVID, but is just made more urgent by it, is the relative shortage of high-level skills in the region. That's not evenly distributed through the region, but there are significant problems with high-level skills at the university level and above, and also specific technical skills that our involvement in the further education system may help us to address in the future. So just to set out how the skills system works in the region, I'm just going to briefly talk about the funding behind the different skills interventions and educational interventions. So the largest source of investment in adult education in the region, and the adult education budget, is managed by the West Midlands Combined Authority, and hence our particular interest in skills at that level and at that age level. Also, the new funding that's been available for the rollout of T levels, intended to group and give more coherence to vocational qualifications in the region. Existing funding by the Apprenticeship Levy, and specific funding for 16 to 19-year-old education. And we'll talk about that level of education in a bit as well, because that has been particularly impacted by the pandemic. And I've also set out, referring to the qualification levels that I'd previously mentioned, these two maps here just give a quick sense of the relationship between deprivation in the region and then levels of qualification in the region. So you notice in the black and white map on the left-hand side here, darker areas, and these are census boundaries, darker areas correspond to more deprivation, and as we see in the urban core, and typically less as you get further out. And on the right-hand side here, I've overlaid over the top of that deprivation map a map of qualification levels, where areas that are in a darker red color here are areas which have a larger proportion of the population with no qualifications. So there's quite a strong association here in the areas that are more deprived typically have more people without any formal qualifications. And then there are some areas, you can see Bioforest here, and some other areas where people have lower levels of qualifications or higher level of qualifications than you'd expect from the demographics. So I've just set that out there just to give a bit more clarity about where those issues are concentrated in the region, because for many of these issues of education and skills, they are not evenly distributed through the region. So I'm just going to talk briefly about skills supply from the education and further education and university systems, and the impact from COVID. So a couple of the key statistics I thought were worth mentioning here: 71% of state school pupils in the first few months of the pandemic received less than one daily lesson, and which obviously contributes to inequalities, and was not the case for privately educated pupils. And 61% of apprenticeships were interrupted in some way, whether that's because the apprentices were furloughed, made redundant, or had their off-the-job learning suspended. International university enrollment, interestingly, held up quite strongly, and that was one area that looked potentially risky with interruptions to travel, but enrollment has held up quite strongly, so that didn't materialise as a risk for the time being. Graduate retention in general is slightly weaker than the UK, or I should be saying here the England average, but we also produce quite a lot of graduates in sheer number, which helps to compensate for that. It does mean in the long run that that's a drag on our supply of advanced skills. So that's something that we need to bear in mind and to improve in the long run, to improve that supply. And I've also got one graph here just presenting the age ranges of people attending further education in the region. This is, as I mentioned, when talking about the adult education budget, this is an area of significant regional government responsibility. So this is one area where we're able to get a bit more involved and to improve provision in the long run, and it's recently sort of fallen into our sort of purview, if you like. There has been relatively little change in the further education system over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of the raw numbers of young people going through the system. So we note here a bit less than 300,000 qualifications were completed each year, a slightly lower number of pupils. And provision is very concentrated in NVQ levels 1 to 3. And what I mean by NVQ levels here is NVQ2 is comparable to with GCSE. So we're talking pre-GCSE, GCSE, and then level 3 is proportionate to A levels. So those are the sort of areas of education that are targeted largely by further education. We have comparatively less supply at higher levels than that. So that's another area of potential progress to help supply high level skills. So in terms of age range, it's quite a broad distribution here. We reach a lot of people from 16 and up, and there's also a significant contingent of mature students. So it's a roughly even split there in terms of the population that are supplied by the system. And although I don't note it here, the further education system does a relatively good job at reaching different ethnic groups in different parts of the region. That's something I would highlight as one of the strengths of the further education system as it stands. And I'm now going to move on just to briefly highlight a few aspects of the demand for skills in the region and the demand from the job markets. So I've mentioned here the Adzuna data, which highlights the trends in job postings by industry and by region throughout the pandemic. So in the first few months when we saw the steepest dip in recruitment, so we're talking here from the advent of the pandemic in late March last year through to late summer 2020, and there's been a partial recovery since then. The initial dip was about 50%, and that's an average across industries there. We've also seen in recent years a decline in self-employment, so there's a long-term change there going on in the structure of employment. And I'd also note here in terms of long-term changes as well, that even when we're talking and speculating here about changes that we can expect in different industries and in terms of how many people are going to be employed and automation, etc., just to bear in mind that the majority of job postings that we see in the region are generated by people retiring from existing jobs. So if an industry is large, even if it is contracting, we're still going to see a large number of jobs coming up through that replacement demand, as we're calling it here. And I've made a note here about the employer skills survey, and what employers who are surveyed on their particular barriers to recruiting staff have highlighted. They put lack of necessary skills first. They put that above other considerations, such as working hours and conditions, as being the biggest obstacle to getting new employees in post. One piece of positive news I'd highlight about the jobs market in the region is that in the West Midlands we have a narrower gender pay gap than most regions, and also that it has improved faster in recent years than most regions as well. So although there is a significant disparity here in our 3 local enterprise partnership areas, these ratios are much better than the UK average, which is 82%. So women earn 82% as much as men on average, whereas we notice in the Black Country, that's 92%, and we see 86% and 86% again in the other 2 local enterprise partnership areas. So we're doing relatively well on that metric, though we might prefer that there was no disparity at all. And finally, I've got a comparison here when considering our demand of the number of people who are leaving our further education system with different types of qualifications against job openings in those different areas. So we get a sense here of the shortfall and the oversupply of different subjects by our further education system. So you notice on the lower part of this graph here, where we have minus numbers next to our bars, these are areas where we provide more training, employment opportunities. And I should note, obviously, there are many reasons beyond employment that we're training people here. And some of these foundational skills we notice at the bottom here for preparing people for independent life, etc., are often a stepping stone to other courses. So just because we're oversupplying it doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. And then we notice at the top here as well that we've got various areas in which we have a significant undersupply. So we'll notice particularly around care, hospitality, teaching, retail. I can't see the top two bars because of my banner here, but you'll be able to read them. So that just gives us an oversupplying skills relative to what's in demand. And just reflecting on that evidence that I've presented here, I'm just going to pose a few questions, not necessarily to discuss now, but just have in mind as being raised by this work. So I've noted first here the need to supply digital and complex analytical skills across different sectors in the region, as something that we don't currently have a strength in by the further education system, but that's an opportunity for development, partnership, and obviously a very growing field. I've highlighted again graduate retention and also postgraduate skill levels. And we're relatively short on graduate, postgraduate level education. And some DFE analysis, admittedly prior to the pandemic, suggested that would also be slower to grow that skill level relative to other regions in the UK. So that's a long-term challenge for us. Apprenticeships, as I noted in the highlighted figures there, have been hit very hard by the pandemic. They had been improving since 2017 for 3 years, and now they've been hit quite hard. That hit has also been concentrated in small firms, so there is an opportunity there to try and support smaller firms in still taking on apprenticeships, and making sure that geographically as well that they're available through the region. That's one of the consequences of only large companies being able to take on apprenticeships, is that they can't be everywhere, so there's an overlap there. And then also considering the specific jobs that are going to be at greatest risk from technological and industrial change over the next few years, what the existing skills and competencies are for people who work in those jobs, and then what the compatibilities are between those skills and the jobs of the future, and how easy it will be to conduct that sort of retraining. And then finally, I've mentioned the pathways for retraining that we can create also for workers aged 25 and up as well, making use of that existing capacity in further education. I think that is everything. So thank you very much for following that one.
Thank you, Alex. Now hand over to Anne to update us on the work on megatrends and future cities.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking about megatrends. I'm going to tell you what they are in case you don't know, and what they mean for the future of cities. And I think this is something that's of interest to every single person as we look forward, and as well as looking back, really. So this is much more future focused, I suppose. And what we mean by a megatrend is a major movement or trend that has a transformative business across all aspects of our lives. And I've given some examples here of the sorts of things I'm talking about, like technological change, the whole net zero agenda, and issues like demographic change, where perhaps we might think particularly about ageing there. So these are the sorts of things that have a big impact on us all going forward. I'm going to report on work we've been doing in 2021 on these issues, but as Beck highlighted at the outset, there was a section on megatrends that I think generated quite a lot of interest in the State of the Region report last year. And this slide just summarises some of the issues that came out of some facilitated workshops we had earlier in the year. And they tackled issues like mobilities, health, the future of work, attitudes and values, business models, places, business districts. So you can see they're the sort of big picture kind of trends. And I've highlighted here some of the cross-cutting themes that come out of all of this. Some of these we've highlighted already, like the role of digitalisation and technological change across business models. Both Alex and Beck have highlighted that. An expected increase in hybrid working, something that I'll say a little bit more about. I think the reach of climate change and green considerations, that's something that's changed and is changing and is becoming more extensive. Exacerbation of inequalities. Both our speakers so far have mentioned that. That comes out of our discussions thinking about the future and what megatrends might bring. And also thinking about the mix of activities in different places as the function of places might change and activities in places might change going forward. We're thinking about the purposes of cities going forward, not necessarily exactly the same as in the past. So that's just by way of some background there. I said I'd say something about future work, and I want to pick up on some issues here. And I think when we're talking about hybrid working, I think this is something that was already happening, but what's happened is it's accelerated big time. I mean, if somebody had told me that I would manage to work from home for as long as I have done, and perhaps go into the office occasionally, I wouldn't have thought it's possible. But I think we've all perhaps done things that we haven't thought were possible and perhaps changed our mindsets somewhat about moving forward. And if we think about cities, they've been places of meeting and coming together. And I don't think that necessarily means that going forward, agglomeration economies are eradicated. That's not what some of the leading urban and economic geographers think. It's just that the next normal isn't exactly going to be the same as the normal pre-COVID. So for people working in offices, and clearly not everybody does work in an office, but we're thinking about how that might look going forward, perhaps 2 or 3 days a week at home, some in the office, but varying by role and career stage, particularly important perhaps for younger people to be in offices as they're in that learning stage of their careers, learning from their colleagues, perhaps not having such suitable places at home. There's also issues about how we're seeing now the limits of virtual working. Perhaps in the short term, it can work. In the longer term, I think we're learning what it's good at doing and what it's less good at doing. And I think we've learned that face-to-face interaction is good at generating new business, collaboration, etc. So we're going to be making different choices in the future about what we're going to be doing in the office and what we're going to be doing remotely. And we might choose to do some things in the office that we could do at home and vice versa. If we're thinking about places, I think what we have to think about going forward, if we're having hybrid working, we have to think about not only workers in cities and central business districts, but also about visitors. What's going to be attractive to visitors? And I think this moves the argument to something about the importance of design and the public realm coming more to the forefront. We've seen in terms of something called tactical urbanism, how we can try out low-cost, small-scale interventions, see if they work, and then perhaps think about making them permanent. We've seen a desire for green and blue space, a clean environment. That's coming up the agenda and is there going forward in terms of thinking about what future cities might be like. And also thinking about the uses. If we're having less bricks and mortar retail, perhaps slightly less commercial, that's a bit disputed because we might have more people, more businesses in there, but people going in less of the time. But we might see more of a shift to leisure and residential. That seems to be the direction of travel that our research is highlighted. And we've also got to think about making places attractive, not only to some people, but perhaps to those people who are physically close to the city centre, perhaps, but psychologically distant. How can we attract them in? How can we make the city centre a place for them? And that raises the whole issue about citizens' engagement in the future of places, future of cities, etc. There are also a range of issues about future infrastructure and transport being a big issue here. There's a whole set of issues about public transport. How can we make public transport attractive? The need for reliable public transport if we're going to attract passengers in. Issues about how we get our public transport system to work where there's perhaps scope for peak spreading, less people coming in at rush hours, making it attractive for non-work as well as work travellers. And then something I think also is increasingly important is going forward, the digital substitution for some business journeys. So perhaps net zero going forward implies less business travel. And that's going to be important for somewhere like the West Midlands that's been important for business tourism. And then also, as we've talked about the whole issues of infrastructure and digitalisation, the whole issue about having a robust digital infrastructure and thinking about security and cybersecurity issues going forward and coping with that. Thinking about how these different megatrends, these large trends come together in nexuses of opportunities and threats. I'm just going to share with you a few issues here. And I've purposely tried to focus more on opportunities than threats. Both are clearly important. But there is a whole nexus of issues about green issues, sustainability and health that come together. We've had increased awareness of sustainability. People are interested in their local environment in lockdown. There's an increased demand for green space. There's within supply chains, there's an increased attraction of local suppliers, thinking about provenance of goods, health, active travel. So there's a whole nexus of issues there around health and green space and sustainability that come together, and thinking about how we plan cities to meet those opportunities and to make healthy lifestyles, sustainable lifestyles. There's also the appeal of city centres. If city centres are going to be meeting places, which seems to be what they're going to be going forward, how do we think not only about offices space, but also experiences? How do we make them attractive for social gatherings, events and culture, and bring people in to share in those experiences? I think there's, as our speakers have highlighted, there's issues around business models and technology where we've seen an acceleration of technology adoption. Perhaps people's mindsets have grown to think about innovation in different ways as digital and tech growth has expanded. There's an important issue in terms of how firms can look if they're thinking about remote working, how the geographical skills base can expand. We can in fact think of a future where we might see increasing leapfrogging of the local labour market to recruit workers from further afield in the UK or beyond the region. And I think that's both an opportunity and a challenge going forward. And there's also the balance of trends in terms of reshoring, offshoring and northshoring being where we see movement out of London, and the Midlands has gained there, the West Midlands has gained there. And then the place issues, as I've mentioned, of 2 to 3 day week city centre working, how we service that, thinking about what the internal office environment's like to attract people. We've also seen issues about people thinking about bringing services closer together in something termed the 15-minute city. And then we also have Birmingham specific opportunities in terms of Birmingham, but we also have Wolverhampton, Coventry, and thinking about different types of opportunities going forward for different places. A lot of these megatrends have impacts everywhere, but how do Birmingham, Coventry, Wolverhampton and other cities realise them and make the places function the best they can? In terms of threats, we've had issues about mental health, issues about people's concerns about safety and security. We've heard from Alex about skills and this issue that there's still a proportion of people left behind. That's going to be an ongoing issue going forward. Also, this issues about increasing inequality or growing inequality and what that means for social mobility and perhaps polarisation by age. So individuals have different capacity to take advantage of those opportunities, and what policies do we need to be able to counter that? And then some of the place issues I think I've covered already, but these issues that do come together in terms of perhaps less retail and hospitality in city centres, lower footfall. What does the reduction in business tourism mean? Perhaps less international travel. What does that mean for cities? What does it mean for public transport? And what does it mean for segregation of places? And then just to highlight how we're taking this forward, we're doing some continuing work in Birmingham City Centre with the Colmore bid on the Future Business District. That work has a particular focus on Birmingham, but is pertinent elsewhere. And we're going to be reporting on that in October, it looks like, which will bring together a whole body of work on our evidence review, provocation papers, secondary data analysis, consultations with businesses and stakeholders, and some scenarios which we've put forward, looking about increasing or decreasing employment and increasing and decreasing footfall, and what those scenarios mean, and particularly for policy, what measures we can put in place to mitigate the worst aspects and facilitate the best aspects. So a lot of things to think about going forward, not only in the short term, but also these things are going to affect us all in the medium term. So thanks very much.
Hand over now to Delma, who's going to introduce the data lab that's also launching today.
Thanks, Beck, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm sure you're all wondering, where can you access all this fab research and insight? So we're really pleased today to officially launch the West Midlands Data Lab today. It's really going to provide for partners a single interactive portal to get a wealth of the up-to-date minute research data and expert insights, a really unique tool that will help partners inform decision-making around key investments and policy formulation for economic and social benefit in the West Midlands. A really important part of this West Midlands REDI partnership is continuing the work to grow and deepen our evidence base relating to the issues impacting the West Midlands economy. And this new lab puts the power of data and research at the fingertips of diverse partners from across the region. So I'm just going to take you on a bit of a tour of the site. We'll put the link in the chat, and feel free to add to this. The site will continue to evolve. It will provide access to all the products across the whole partnership. You'll be able to access live data, Power BI dashboards, you'll get the intelligence briefings, all the data lab projects, access to all the in-depth research, and critically, as we talked about today, the state of the region. So really trying to support you as the partners to inform decision and policy formulation. So the lab is structured currently around these sort of 5 areas, so you can get directly to the state of the region, also the data lab projects, but also some key intelligence around those 3 key areas of economy, including business, people and places. So if I just show you one just sort of example of how the site works. So if we look at the economic recovery of the region, so looking at the economy, the way we've set it up is that within each section you get some key at a glance information to give you an overview of the topics, making sure it's always reflective of the latest data. Then you can scroll down and you can access the thematic subsection, so things you'd expect like GVA, earnings, structure on the data, structure of the business base. So we've just clicked here on the regional business activity. So this is an interactive Power BI dashboard. So it links the data directly to our data warehouse. So the minute it's released, it's there live for you. So you can access the time series data to look at the direction of travel. Obviously, the ability to compare regions is key, and the dashboard will provide regional and national benchmarks. And it's a live site. We'll continue to grow the indicators and populate it with new information on a daily basis. Obviously, the data is only one part. The interpretation of the data into intelligence and the policy implications is obviously a key part of West Midlands REDI. So on the day, we produce these headline briefings. Here is just one we did on the PMI, which started to show what the trends were and as the region's economic outlook looked to the future. Spatial analysis is obviously a really important key as well, and really understanding how you can get down and understand the variation, as Alex showed, across people. So where the data is available, you can also access interactive maps that go down to ward level. Here we've got the claimant dashboard, so you can really get down and really understand the interventions so that we can look at how we might need to support our local places, which is obviously really critical for the levelling up agenda. But understanding all aspects, you know, only one data slice tells a certain picture, understanding the analysis of the claimants, their characteristics, their gender, their ethnicity. So wherever information is available, it's all supplied to you there so that we can really get into the targeting. But as well as that, so that's sort of the data and the Power BI dashboards. We've also got a section then around the state of the region. So you'll be able to click, here we are, today's report. So you can click on that and access and understand what the current stock take of the region is saying, but also all the report that Beck has talked through, it's supported by a whole range of further evidence. So here you'll be able to access some of the great research that's been undertaken across the whole partnership. All the LEPs, the chambers, all partners have been working through when we worked on the local industrial strategy together, the sector work the LEPs do on ongoing basis, the digital, the environmental, it will all be accessible there alongside previous reports if you want to see how things have changed over time. As I mentioned, there's the data lab projects as well that are ongoing through the partnership. So here you can understand the innovative work being done to look at the specific challenges across the region. So data around levelling up, inequalities, tracking wealth creation. It's really trying to understand data that you can't get to from the normal challenges. You can access the report that Alex showed there, so you can get access to that local skills plan that partners have been worked on. So hopefully you'll find this a really helpful, useful tool. It will continue to grow. It's live now and it's there for partners to access and input to. And it's really there to help partners, you know, how we can build better, stronger business cases, securing greater investment for the region, being able to have those comparisons and benchmarks, supporting our policy recommendations, evidencing those regional impacts to inform our reactions to government policy and strategy, and really better understanding the region's needs and opportunities to target investment for the widest possible economic and social impact. So I hope you find it useful and welcome all feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Delma. I'll hand over to Simon now to chair the discussion panel.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Beck. And thank you, Delma. It's fantastic to see these things come alive. We've got an excellent West Midlands Data Lab hub there. It helps with visualization and really enables some of our stakeholders to interact with this data and apply the data and the analytics to their own problems. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Delma, for that. So we've got a panel discussion now to finish off this afternoon. And the focus of this is post-COVID and post-Brexit futures and the challenges facing the region in the next 12 months. And it's fantastic to have three great panelists who are trying to apply some of this analysis to their own challenges within their organisations. These are all WMREDI board organisations represented. And what I'm going to do is introduce first me, for anyone who hasn't met me, but also then all of the panelists. And then we're going to hand over and start off with a brief overview of the challenges as they see them, and I'll set that up in a minute. But my name's Simon Collinson. If we haven't met, I am Director of City-REDI and WMREDI. I'm also Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor leading on regional engagement for the University of Birmingham. It's fantastic to be part of this great event. So I hope you enjoyed those presentations. Our panelists are Roger Mendonca, who is Chief Operating Officer of the West Midlands Growth Company, massively concerned with inward investment patterns, the visitor economy. These are front and centre for the growth company. And we're seeing fundamental changes in the drivers of both what is propelling firms to invest or not invest in the region. And the visitor economy was picked up by a number of those presentations. Secondly, we've got Henrietta Brucella, who is Director of Economic Strategy at the GBS LEP. And again, they have a very strong focus, as do all the LEPs, on business support and creating jobs. And particularly, I guess, interested in this gap that Alex describes so well between supply and demand for skills in the region, which is a massive impediment, but also opportunity for driving future growth. And then thirdly, we've got Paula Diaz, who is the Operations Director of the Coventry and Warwick LEP. And again, another sub-region in our region facing a number of threats and opportunities from global shifts in the location of industry, including manufacturing, of course, which is big in Coventry and Warwickshire. And a group focusing on innovation, but also on sustainability and our green ambitions for the region. So it's a fairly open session, and we're going to invite each of those speakers to talk to the, talk to this particular challenge in a moment, and then open it up to a bit of a broader discussion. But I'm going to ask each of them in turn, in that order, to really relate or connect the main challenges and opportunities that they just heard about from the presenters to their own aims and objectives, because they work in organisations whose remit is to support growth in the region. So what are the main implications for you? And we're going to start with Roger, if we can. Roger, thanks.
Thanks, Simon. Much appreciate that. Some excellent work there. So as you said, the Growth Company really focuses upon the investment with the Investment Promotion Agency for the region, and also the visitor economy. And the two are quite closely linked. So we talked a lot, I think Anne mentioned quite a lot in her presentation around how business tourism might change with the move towards net zero. Actually, business tourism is not only important in its own right, but it's actually really, really important for the inward investment agenda as well, because often people's first experience of a region is coming to a conference. And actually in this part of the world, we're very good at that, NEC in particular, but obviously around the entire region. So actually, if those links start to get broken, then there are impacts across the patch. However, I'll step back a little bit, and I will be brief because I know others to talk. I think it's as much about opportunities as it is about challenges, actually. We've actually stood up quite well on the back of what's happened. If we'd had this conversation 2 years ago, knowing that COVID was going to happen and knowing that Brexit was around the corner, we'd have perhaps expected inward investment and tourism both to be decimated as a result of that. And certainly tourism has had a very hard time. But inward investment has stood up very well. And that, I think, is because of the underlying sector strengths that we have. They're very robust. And we've probably only gone down by about 25% as a region from what we expected to get in terms of our inward investment. We've actually bucked the national trend, done better than elsewhere. And we've seen some pretty major investments coming in as well, despite what's been happening. Goldman Sachs is probably the most obvious example. The BPF sector here is very strong, but also MHCLG into Wolverhampton and DFT into Birmingham. So lots of strengths. And we're uniquely placed as a region over the next 12 months. City of Culture going on, which I won't say any more about because I think Paula's probably going to talk about that. But also the Commonwealth Games, Birmingham 2022, provides us with a unique opportunity nowhere else in the country has. We launched the Business and Tourism Programme just last week, which essentially is going to give us an opportunity to run 90 events to raise the profile of the region across the world, which are going to put us in a really good place to bounce back. So while I think there definitely are the challenges that have been mentioned, I think you can also see an awful lot of positives as well.
Roger, thanks very much. The Growth Company is on a bit of a roll now with some investment funding in itself to improve its capability to reach out. Interestingly, Stephen Boxall asked a question, just briefly, if you can answer this. I assume it's a fairly straightforward answer, but we always talk about inward investment and so little about indigenous investment. I think he means indigenous, is actually ingenious investment, but I'm assuming he means retaining investment from current firms. That is also a priority, Roger.
Yeah, absolutely is. And it's a really interesting question given what's happened over the last year, because essentially our tactic as a growth company, when we moved into the COVID situation, was to say, okay, look, we know international travel is not going to happen. We know it's going to be very difficult to land internal stuff. So what we need to focus on is two things. One is actually trying to get investment from the rest of the UK, particularly the Southeast, which we've done very well. But the second part was trying to grow our own companies as well, and helping them to make sure that when they are taking great decisions, that they're looking to move into or stay into the West Midlands rather than to move elsewhere for that growth. And again, we've had quite a lot of results with that as well. And with the money that we are getting from currently from DIT for key account management, and actually from the Combined Authority as well, that's an area that we'd look to see to grow over the next few years.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those issues. We're going to move on to Henrietta Brucella, if you can, from the GBS Lab.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Like Roger, I think it's useful to look at the challenges, but really look at the flip side as well, and look at the opportunities arising from those challenges. And probably also, in my mind, we'll probably move away a little bit from the word recovery and just think we're adjusting to a new reality. This time last year, we did think it was a straightforward recovery, but I think we've kind of come back from that. And that new reality also comes with challenges, but very real opportunities as well. In terms of the really interesting presentations that were just, I can't believe how much you managed to get into 1 hour of presentations, but certainly what all those presentations and challenges align with is what we've captured in our delivery plan, which of course is about economic growth. Of course, it's about jobs and skills, but as cross-cutting themes, it's very much there about clean growth and green growth, which is a real opportunity for our region. And you've got the massive investments like Rugeley Power Station, you've got the Severn Trent investments coming in. So real opportunities there to create green jobs and clean growth. We've got a cross-cutting theme around young people. I think the challenge of preventing a lost generation is phrased a little bit negatively. I actually think Birmingham, being as young a city as it is, also comes with a massive opportunity to galvanise the creativity and the energy that comes from young people. And then there's a cross-cutting theme in our delivery plan around inclusive growth, and obviously COVID very sadly has exacerbated equalities. And being a resident of pretty much Birmingham city centre myself, it's palpable and visible all around that those equalities have exaggerated. I think in terms of some of the real positives, you mentioned, or I think Beck mentioned, the startup rates in Birmingham and how they've held up, and how therefore that illustrates the level of innovation, the level of entrepreneurial spirit that is there. I don't think we should see the relatively high failure rate necessarily as a negative. The more out of the box you think, the more far-fetched maybe some of your assumptions are, and therefore the more likely they are to fail. If you go to places like Silicon Valley, failures are worn as much as a badge of honor as successes are. And I think we probably need to get more to that. And certainly, as you're aware, Simon, we ran as GBS LEP a Pivot and Prosper program during COVID, which was very, very successful in the sense that £2 million investment generated in the region of £30 million additional GBA. And I think it's the same with startups. Sometimes we need to pivot, and at unprecedented times where the unthinkable has become thinkable, it's definitely a case of trying out. And that's where I think the new approach to business support that of course the LEPs are working with the Combined Authority on can really help businesses in our region not shy away from that pivot either, and make the most of these challenges.
Excellent points there. One about the churn rate. I mean, business birth rate is a really healthy sign of entrepreneurship. Absolutely right. I think we do, and the LEP has started to really do this well, which is to intervene to sustain businesses and improve the survivability, because then you get the new blood and the new innovation really embedded in the economy. There's a few questions on skills that we'll come back to, but if you think about this, we'll move on to Paula, but if you could both think about this. I mean, the dilemma is we have this mismatch and skills take a long time to build up. How do we get companies doing more of this? British companies are really quite poor, certainly near the bottom of the OECD ranking in their own investment in skills. Everyone keeps talking about the HEIs, the universities, or the public sector. Actually, our businesses could invest more in skills. So I'd love to hear your views on that in just a second, but I'm going to jump straight on to Paula Diaz to give her view.
Okay, thank you. Thanks all. And Simon, just one point of correction. Coventry and Warwickshire, my colleagues will not forgive if I don't mention the Shire part of the geography, not just Warwick.
Apologies.
So, that's no problem at all. So just to sort of really carry on the theme that that Roger and Henrietta have sort of talked about in terms of looking at things through the lens and optics of opportunities and linking back to challenges. So taking first the green agenda, that's obviously kind of the central plank, the fulcrum of the UK recovery that we're hearing from UK government around net zero, build back greener, build back better. And I genuinely think, and albeit the points that Beck's made around, we're a kind of a net importer in sort of, in that particular space, we have illustrated growth in those sectors, even through the rocky times of post-Brexit and the pandemic. And that to me illustrates an absolute strength and opportunity that is inherent in this part of the world. And I say the world because all of the things that are the opportunities going forward are going to flourish from this region because of our history and our absolute track record in the things that have gone before, and whether that's around electrification and the area finally bringing home what should be a prize we're having in terms of the Gigafactory. We got everything crossed and more to secure that. So the electrification agenda is certainly a massive opportunity, and obviously not least a challenge in terms of getting young and older workers ready for the large scale change that would involve. But if you kind of take all of the other mobility sort of modes, whether that's hydrogen trains, e-scooters, bicycles, drone technologies, with urban airports and sort of car sharing, autonomous vehicles, all of our expertise is really loud and proud in our assets, in our skill base, in our DNA. So I actually think it's more about linking to green and to the lost generation. It's our responsibility to really inspire the young people to think about that as their future area of work. Not all young people, but really to continue that expertise that we have and to continue that almost, as I say, DNA type mentality, and get them to think about that as a future. And I think the assets that we've got, and certainly linking back to one of the points I think Alex made about the increase in higher apprenticeships for that particular sort of space is really important. We've certainly invested in a higher apprenticeship centre at the University of Warwick, and we're seeing a huge success in throughput in that particular space. So I think the whole green, building back green, doing things much more in a green kind of way is definitely the sweet spot that we need to capitalise on, and not almost be left behind by maybe some of the other areas that have perhaps been the early winners of some of the government announcements in the last sort of 6 months. So really capitalise on that. And then I think the other thing that I would say about certainly the young and the generation, I sort of agree with Henrietta around the kind of the phrase, but I think it's important because I think you need to get attention to it, and I think preventing a lost generation does make people stand up and think about it. Is if we take something like the City of Culture, that's I'm a Coventryan, and for the first time I've seen real life benefit and impact of young people taking a different outlook towards Coventry, and a different sense of pride. The whole programme and the activity, reasons to come to Coventry, reasons to get involved. Actually, my son is also one of the kind of products of the programme itself. He has been able to set up his own business as a result of participating in one of the programmes. So you can kind of see the different ways in which initiatives like the City of Culture and indeed the Commonwealth Games are real events that galvanise something that's maybe sort of tucked under the surface, and people feel it's something to look forward to, it's something to participate in, it's something to regenerate and re-energise what our lives had become, which was very kind of like isolated from big groups of people, from workforce, etc. So I think there's a big opportunity with City of Culture. And the other one that I'd mentioned on City of Culture, and I had this conversation with Beck, is getting young people to think differently about professions, not just sort of business startup in their own right, but other professions which have seen huge losses because of the result of labour force leaving the UK, like hospitality. And we need to present different opportunities around those professions. We need to basically pay these people more to work in those kind of industries, and we need to give them more credibility and more kudos. So, in other parts of Europe, entering into the hospitality sector, whether that's as a kind of part of the waiting team, the meet and greet team, is definitely seen as something to be highly regarded. And I think that is something that we should use as an opportunity to encourage people to sort of take up that particular route of potential job opportunities going forward.
Agreed. Excellent. No, thank you very much for that. We're almost short out of time. I did want to return to the skills issue. I agree entirely with you. I mean, we need to make a place attractive. So we need to work on our brand and our reputation. And, City of Culture, wonderful set of experiences which help retain and attract talent, because retaining and attracting skills. But again, how do we improve the incentives for firms to actually really invest a little better? And let me just nudge you a bit, is higher paid. Let's put it this way. If you paid people more to up their skills and they got better, higher income jobs for higher skilled, and it was clear that firms were supporting that, would this cover both the bases of productivity, potentially sustainability, but certainly inclusivity? Let's go to Roger and Henrietta, and then we're going to have to close down. But I'd just like your views on that.
Thanks. Well, skills are obviously important for the Inward Investment agenda, because it is the first thing companies ask of, so absolutely critical, but it's not something that falls in my remit particularly. My particular concern, I think, about the way we tend to look at skills is that the tendency is to get lots of experts together in a room, come up with a report and say this is the way to do it. And I think if that had been the answer, we wouldn't have a skills problem now. It would have gone about 30 years ago. I suspect the answer is that actually there's a number of different levers that need to be pulled. And we have 3 different LEPs in this region, which I think is a real strength, because they can all try different things, learn from each other and find different ways. So that's what I would look to see happen.
Excellent, thank you. Henrietta, your views?
I see it twofold, really. I do think when you think of our young people and the choices they and those who influence their decisions, like their parents, their family, their peers, make, and how the educational choices they make then link to what the economy needs, is really that slide that showed the surplus and the shortages was a really powerful slide. And I do think there's an issue around careers advice and guidance. I think very often that takes quite traditional routes, sometimes reinforces maybe young people's own perceptions of their abilities and their restrictions as well. Birmingham City Council have just done this really good Breaking Down Barriers report that shows a lot of young people have a negativity bias and don't think they are capable of doing maybe some of the STEM type directions. Maybe some girls might think that that's not for them. So we need to break through that. And then I think the work we do in the region on the apprenticeship levy and using the apprenticeship levy and reinvesting that even for companies who haven't got the levy themselves, I think is a really important tool. And personally, I don't think it's always about pay. It's always about it's also about the perception of, I think Paula said about hospitality as a career, for example. I think what we could do with is a better understanding about the importance of transferable skills, the importance of basic work hygiene, and actually get people into jobs that teach them that kind of work ethic, which is so important, and which employers continuously said some of the European and Eastern European workers give us things that our Indigenous workers don't give us. Well, we're post-Brexit now, so we've got to acquire those types of qualities ourselves.
Excellent. No, that's a fantastic way to end our discussion. I'm sorry it's been so brief, but attitude to work, attitude to a place, these are critical things. And picking up the general theme from all of you, I agree entirely. We need to steer a bit away from recovery and threats and talk completely about opportunities, because it is a time of restructuring, and there's anxiety and uncertainty, but this is a fantastic region and we have such a set of assets and capabilities to move forward. And building up momentum involves partly these kinds of attitude changes towards opportunities versus threats. So many thanks to all three of you. Sorry it's been brief. I do thank all three of you for taking time with us and also being long-term supporters of REDI and the stuff we're doing with data and analysis. Thanks too to Beck and the team for setting up the event and all the presenters that came earlier. You're right, we packed a lot of quite complex messages into a really succinct set of presentations. Thanks to all of those. Lastly, thanks to the audience. There's been chat, there's been Q&A posted up. We're going to try and, on our website and elsewhere, put up some answers to that chat and continue the conversation. So for now, I'll call it to an end. And again, thanks to everyone for taking part. Really interesting and actually a bit more uplifting than some of the stuff we've been doing recently. So pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you very much.